The music was loud, the lights were bright, and the entire ballroom was filled with the kind of people who rarely looked down at anyone. Expensive suits, sparkling dresses, and cameras from famous social media pages surrounded the stage. This wasn't just any party. It was a billionaire celebration, the kind of event where money flowed like water and pride filled the air even more than the music. At the center of it all stood Victor Langford, a billionaire known not only for his wealth but also for his confidence. Some people would even call it arrogance. Victor loved attention, and tonight he had already given the crowd plenty of reasons to cheer. Earlier in the evening, he had surprised everyone by stepping onto the dance floor and showing off his moves. To be fair, he wasn't bad. The crowd laughed, clapped, and filmed him as he danced like a man who believed he could do anything. Victor wiped the sweat from his forehead and grabbed the microphone with a grin that stretched across his face. "All right," he said loudly, looking around the luxurious hall. "I think I've proven something tonight." The audience leaned in, curious about what he would say next. He chuckled confidently and pointed toward the dance floor. "I'll make a challenge," he continued. "If anyone here can dance better than me, I'll give them $100 million. For a moment, the entire room went silent. Then laughter erupted everywhere. Some people thought he was joking. Others believed it was simply another dramatic stunt from a billionaire who loved entertainment. Cameras immediately turned toward the stage. $100 million for a dance? It sounded ridiculous, but with Victor Langford, people knew anything was possible. One by one, a few guests jokingly stepped forward, but none of them seemed serious. They danced for a few seconds. The crowd laughed politely, and Victor shook his head with playful confidence each time. To him, the whole thing was just fun. No one here would actually challenge him seriously. But near the back of the hall, far from the golden lights and cameras, someone had been quietly watching the entire scene. A young maid stood beside a table, holding a tray she had almost forgotten about. Her name was Sophia, and she had been working at the mansion for months. Most people at the party hadn't even noticed her presence. To them, she was just part of the staff, someone invisible moving between tables, clearing glasses and refilling drinks. Yet Sophia's eyes were fixed on the stage. She watched Victor laugh, watched the crowd cheer, and listened carefully as people repeated the unbelievable challenge again and again. $100 million, if someone could dance better than the billionaire. Some guests were still joking about it when Sophia slowly placed a tray down on a nearby table. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she began walking toward the dance floor. At first, nobody noticed her. Why would they? A maid stepping into the spotlight wasn't something anyone expected at a luxury billionaire party. But as she moved closer, a few people started whispering. Victor noticed the movement too. He looked down from the stage and frowned slightly, confused by what he was seeing. The music suddenly lowered. The crowd turned. And standing there, in the middle of the grand ballroom, was the quiet maid. Victor laughed again, louder this time. But what happened next would wipe that smile off his face and leave the entire room completely stunned. Victor's laughter echoed through the ballroom, and for a moment it felt like everyone else joined in with him. Some guests covered their mouths. Others whispered to each other, and a few lifted their phones to record what they thought would be a funny moment. After all, the person standing in the middle of the dance floor wasn't a celebrity guest or a professional performer. She was a maid. Sophia stood quietly under bright lights, her simple uniform looking completely out of place among the expensive gowns and designer suits. For a few seconds she didn't say anything. Her hands rested calmly at her sides while the crowd looked at her with curiosity, amusement, and a little disbelief. Victor leaned slightly toward the microphone again, still smiling as if the entire situation was a joke made just for him. "Well," he said, his voice echoing to the speakers, "this is unexpected." More laughter rippled through the audience. One of the guests near the front whispered loudly, "Is she serious?" Another person chuckled. "Maybe she thinks this is an open audition." Victor stepped down from the stage and walked closer to Sophia, studying her face as if trying to understand why she had walked into the spotlight. Up close, he could see something different in her expression. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't look nervous either. She looked calm. That small detail made Victor pause for just a second. "You heard the challenge?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Sophia nodded gently. Yes. Her voice was quiet, but clear enough for the nearby microphones to catch. The billionaire glanced around the room, clearly enjoying the attention again. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, he said with playful tone, the challenge was simple. Dance better than me, and you win $100 million. The crowd cheered again at the dramatic number. Victor crossed his arms. And you want to try? Sophia didn't answer immediately. Her eyes moved briefly across the ballroom. The cameras, the glittering lights, the rows of wealthy guests watching her like she was part of the evening's entertainment. Finally, she said, yes. The reaction was instant. Some people laughed louder than before. Others started filming more seriously now, realizing that this moment might actually turn into something viral. A billionaire dance challenge against a maid? The internet would love it. But Victor noticed something else. She still didn't look nervous. That calm expression returned again, and it made him curious. Interesting, he said slowly. You must be very confident. Sophia shook her head slightly. Not confident, she replied. Just willing. Her answer made a few people in the audience murmur. It was such a simple sentence, but something about it felt strange in the middle of all this luxury and noise. Victor studied her again, trying to decide if she was joking or simply brave enough to embarrass herself in front of hundreds of people. Tell me something, he said. What's your name? Sophia. And you work here? Yes. A few guests exchanged looks, clearly amused by the situation. To them, the story was already entertaining. A maid stepping onto the billionaire's stage. But none of them knew anything about Sophia. They didn't know that long before she worked in this mansion. Her life had been very different. They didn't know about the small neighborhood festivals where music filled the streets every weekend. They didn't know about the tiny dance studio that once stood above a grocery shop, where young girls spent hours practicing steps while the city outside moved on without noticing. They didn't know that dancing had once been the only thing that made Sophia feel free. But that was years ago. Life had changed. Responsibilities had come. Dreams had been pushed aside. Until tonight. Victor glanced at the DJ booth and lifted a hand. All right, he said with a grin returning to his face. Let's make this interesting. The DJ nodded, ready to play. The crowd leaned forward, phones raised, excitement growing across the room. Victor stepped onto the dance floor and stretched his shoulders confidently. Then he looked at Sophia again. Just remember, he said with a teasing smile, $100 million is a very big prize. Sophia simply looked at the floor for a moment, as if listening for something only she could hear. And when the music finally began to rise to the speakers, the entire ballroom held its breath. The music slowly filled the ballroom, starting with a soft rhythm that rolled through the speakers like a heartbeat. Conversation stopped. The guests who had been laughing a moment earlier now leaned forward with curiosity. Cameras lifted higher. Every eye in the room focused on the center of the floor, where the billionaire and the maid stood facing each other. Victor Langford cracked his neck slightly and rolled his shoulders like a performer warming up for a show. He loved moments like this. Attention had always followed him, whether it was in business meetings, interviews, or extravagant parties like this one. To him, the dance challenge was just another way to entertain his guests. Across from him, Sophia remained still. She closed her eyes for just a second, breathing slowly as if she were blocking out the noise of the crowd. The bright lights reflected off the marble floor beneath her shoes. Somewhere behind the cameras, the mansion staff stood frozen, watching one of their own standing in the spotlight, where they were never meant to stand. Near the back of the room, an older security guard named Thomas folded his arms, observing quietly. He had worked in the mansion longer than most people there. He had seen hundreds of parties, dozens of celebrities, and more than a few moments when Victor's confidence turned into risky challenges. But this felt different. Thomas remembered Sophia when she first arrived to work months ago. She had been quiet, respectful, and hard-working. Most of the staff barely knew anything about her. She did her job and kept to herself. Yet now she was standing in front of the most powerful man in the room, about to compete for a prize that sounded almost unreal. The music grew louder. Victor took the first step. He spun confidently, his polished shoes sliding across the floor with practiced ease. The crowd immediately cheered. Some guests clapped to the beat, while others shouted his name like he was already the winner. Victor moved with energy, adding dramatic spins and smooth footwork. He had learned a few impressive moves over the years, especially during private dance lessons he once took for fun. Tonight, he used every one of them. Each turn of his body seemed designed to remind the room exactly who he was: a billionaire, a performer, a man used to winning. The guests loved it. Phones flashed. People laughed and cheered louder as Victor ended his first sequence with a confident pose. He glanced toward Sophia, raising an eyebrow as if asking a silent question. "Your turn." For a moment she didn't move. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Some people began whispering again, wondering if she had changed her mind. One woman near the front chuckled softly. Maybe she's realizing what she got herself into. Another guest muttered, "A maid competing in a billionaire dance challenge. This will be all over social media by morning." But Sophia wasn't listening to them. Her eyes moved slowly across the ballroom again. The glittering chandeliers above. The wealthy guests watching like judges. The staff members standing nervously along the walls. And Victor, standing there with the same confident smile. A memory flickered through her mind. An old studio with cracked mirrors, the sound of music echoing through narrow hallways, and a younger version of herself practicing the same step again and again while her teacher clapped proudly from a corner. She hadn't thought about those days in a long time. The music changed slightly, the rhythm becoming deeper, stronger. The DJ seemed to sense the tension growing in the room. Victor crossed his arms casually, clearly enjoying the suspense. "Whenever you're ready," he said loudly enough for the nearby microphones to pick up. A few people laughed again, but then something unexpected happened. Sophia finally lifted her head. Her posture changed. The shy maid who had quietly carried trays earlier in the evening seemed to disappear. In her place stood someone focused, balanced, and strangely confident. Thomas, the security guard in the back, noticed it immediately. His eyes narrowed slightly, because the way she positioned her feet, the way she shifted her weight with perfect control, that wasn't the body language of someone who had never danced before. The music kept building. Victor's smile slowly faded into curiosity. And as Sophia took her first small step onto the center of the dance floor, something in the atmosphere of the ballroom quietly shifted. The room felt different the moment Sophia stepped forward. It was a small movement, barely noticeable at first, but it carried a quiet confidence that didn't match the way the guests had been laughing just seconds earlier. The music continued to build through the speakers, the rhythm now deeper, stronger, almost like it was pulling everyone closer to the center of the ballroom. Victor noticed the change immediately. He had expected hesitation, maybe nervous laughter, or even an awkward attempt at a few dance steps before the crowd laughed it off. But the way Sophia moved didn't feel awkward at all. She placed her foot down slowly, perfectly on beat. The crowd grew quiet. It wasn't complete silence, but the loud laughter from before had faded into murmurs. Phones remained raised in the air, recording every second. Some guests leaned forward in their seats, curious now instead of amused. Victor tilted his head slightly, studying her movements more carefully. Sophia's second step came smoother than the first. Her shoulders relaxed as the music flowed through the ballroom, and her body began to move naturally with the rhythm. It wasn't dramatic yet. There were no big spins or flashy tricks. Just clean, controlled steps that matched the music perfectly. Across the room, Thomas, the security guard, straightened his posture. He had seen that kind of control before. Professional dancers move like that, quiet at first but precise. His eyes followed Sophia carefully now, the same way a referee watches the beginning of a match. Victor let out a small laugh into the microphone clipped to his jacket. "All right," he said casually, though his voice carried a hint of curiosity now. "Let's see what you've got." The DJ seemed to sense the shift in energy and raised the volume slightly. The beat filled every corner of the ballroom. Sophia turned smoothly, her foot sliding across the floor in a movement so fluid that a few people near the front gasped softly. It wasn't flashy, but it was elegant, the kind of movement that came from years of practice. A woman near the stage whispered to her friend, "Wait, did you see that?" Her friend nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on the dance floor. Victor's confident smile tightened just a little. He stepped forward again, joining the rhythm to remind the crowd who the real performer was supposed to be tonight. He spun sharply, adding a fast sequence of footwork that had impressed the audience earlier. A few cheers returned from the crowd, but now the reactions were different. Some of the cheers sounded uncertain, as if people were no longer completely sure who they should be rooting for. Sophia responded without rushing. She moved across the floor with calm precision, letting the music guide each step. Her movements began growing more complex. Smooth turns, balanced transitions, and sudden changes in rhythm that matched the beat perfectly. More whispers spread through the audience. How is she doing that? Is she trained? I thought she was just a maid. The tension in the room began to thicken. Cameras zoomed in closer. Even the staff members standing along the walls watched with wide eyes. Victor's expression slowly shifted from amusement to focus. He pushed harder now, adding faster spins and more dramatic moves. His shoes slid sharply across the polished marble as he performed another energetic sequence, finishing with a confident slide that had the crowd clapping loudly again. But the applause faded quicker this time, because Sophia was still moving. She stepped forward again, her movements growing stronger, more expressive with every second. The quiet control from before was still there, but now it carried emotion too, something real that the audience could feel even if they didn't understand it. Thomas shook his head slightly in disbelief. Victor wiped a drop of sweat from his forehead. The billionaire who had started this dance challenge with laughter now watched her carefully, measuring every move. The music reached a powerful beat drop, echoing through the entire hall. And just as the crowd leaned forward, sensing that something unbelievable was about to happen, Sophia suddenly prepared for a move that made Victor's eyes widen for the first time that night. The moment Sophia prepared for that move, the energy in the ballroom shifted again. People who had been casually watching a billionaire dance challenge were now leaning forward in their seats, their phones held steady, as if they were afraid to miss even a second. The music pulsed through the room, and the tension between Victor Langford and the quiet maid standing across from him was suddenly very real. Sophia moved, her body lifted into a smooth spin that flowed perfectly into a fast sequence of footwork. It happened so naturally that for a moment the audience didn't even react. They were simply watching, trying to process what they were seeing. The elegant movement turned into a graceful step, then another turn that matched the beat so perfectly it looked almost effortless. Then the reaction exploded. Gasps, whispers, and surprised laughter spread across the room. Several guests lowered their phones for a moment just to stare directly at the dance floor. Victor's eyes narrowed. He hadn't expected this. What started as a joke, a billionaire offering $100 million for a dance challenge, was quickly turning into something unpredictable. Sophia wasn't just dancing. She was performing with the kind of control that usually belonged on professional stages. Near the back of the ballroom, Thomas, the security guard, muttered quietly to himself, "I knew it." He had been watching her feet since the first step. Now there was no doubt left in his mind. Whoever Sophia was, she had serious training. Victor stepped forward again, refusing to lose the spotlight. He added another energetic routine, faster and louder, drawing cheers from the crowd as he spun and clapped to the rhythm. His confidence returned for a moment as the audience applauded. But the applause faded quickly again, because Sophia answered immediately. Her movements became even more powerful now. The calm control from earlier blended with speed and expression. She stepped forward into the center of the floor and matched the music perfectly, every beat turning into a precise motion. A man in the front row whispered, "How is this even possible?" Someone else said, "Did the billionaire just challenge the wrong person?" The cameras kept rolling. Online viewers were already joining the live streams from the party. Comments were flooding across the screens of people watching through their phones. Billionaire Dance Challenge. Maid versus Billionaire. $100 million dance. The moment was turning viral before anyone even realized it. Victor felt it too. For the first time that evening, the billionaire who had laughed at the idea of losing began to feel pressure. His smile was still there, but it wasn't as relaxed as before. He stepped closer to Sophia while the music continued, lowering his voice just enough that only the nearby microphones caught his words. "Where did you learn to dance like that?" he asked. Sophia didn't stop moving, but she answered. "A long time ago," she said quietly, Her words were simple, but something about the tone carried a story the audience didn't yet understand. Victor studied her again. The maid who worked quietly in his mansion suddenly looked very different under the lights. The grace, the timing, the confidence. It didn't match the life people thought she lived. And then something else happened. Near the edge of the dance floor, one of the event organizers rushed toward Victor's assistant, whispering urgently while pointing at Sophia. The assistant frowned, clearly confused. "What do you mean?" she whispered back. The organizer glanced again at Sophia before answering quietly. I think I know who she is." The assistant's eyes widened. Meanwhile, on the dance floor, the music reached another powerful rise. Sophia's movements grew stronger with every beat, and the audience could feel the moment building towards something unforgettable. Victor wiped his hands against his jacket, his focus sharper now than ever before, because the challenge he had started with laughter was no longer just entertainment. And somewhere in the crowd, a few people were beginning to realize that the quiet maid dancing in front of them might be hiding a past that could change the entire story of this billionaire dance challenge. The music climbed higher, the rhythm pounding through the ballroom like a racing heartbeat. The crowd could feel the moment approaching its peak. Cameras were everywhere now. Some people had even stepped closer to the dance floor, forming a wide circle around Victor and Sophia. Victor took a deep breath. He wasn't laughing anymore. The billionaire who had started the challenge with confidence now looked focused, almost determined. He stepped forward and launched into his most impressive routine yet. Fast spins, sharp turns, and confident footwork that slid across the marble floor. The crowd cheered loudly again, the energy rising with every move. Victor finished with a dramatic slide and lifted his arms slightly, breathing hard but smiling again. For a moment, the applause was strong. But then the music shifted. A deeper beat dropped through the speakers, and Sophia moved. She stepped forward into the center of the floor, her posture steady, her eyes focused only on the rhythm. This time there was no hesitation. Her body flowed with the music, as if every note had been waiting for her. The first move was smooth. The second was faster. Then suddenly her feet moved so quickly that the crowd gasped. Spins, turns, and precise steps connected together like pieces of a story. It wasn't just dancing anymore. It felt like she was expressing something she had kept hidden for years. Phones lifted higher. People stopped whispering. Even the waiters and security staff were watching with wide eyes. Victor's smile slowly faded as he realized something important. He wasn't watching an amateur. He was watching someone who had spent years mastering this art. Sophia's movements became stronger, her confidence growing with every beat. She glided across the floor, turning the entire ballroom into her stage. When she spun, the room seemed to freeze. When she landed each step perfectly on the music, the audience reacted louder than before. And then she performed the move she had prepared earlier. A powerful spin followed by a sudden drop and flawless recovery, timed exactly with the final rise in the music. The ballroom exploded. Cheers, applause, and shocked laughter filled the air. Some guests even stood up from their seats. Victor stared at her, breathing slowly, his expression a mix of disbelief and respect. The music finally faded. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then the crowd began chanting excitedly. Again! Unbelievable! That was insane. Victor walked slowly toward Sophia, the microphone still clipped to his jacket, catching the sound of his breathing. The confident billionaire looked at her carefully now, no longer seeing just a maid who worked in his mansion. "You," he said quietly, shaking his head with a small smile. "You're incredible." The audience waited. Everyone knew what the challenge had been. Dance better than the billionaire and win $100 million. Victor turned toward the crowd and lifted his hands. "Well," he said into the microphone, his voice echoing through the ballroom, "I think it's clear that tonight I lost." The crowd roared again. Some people laughed in disbelief. Others clapped louder, amazed that the billionaire had actually admitted defeat. Victor reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. "A promise is a promise," he said. $100 million. But before he could say anything else, Sophia gently raised her hand. The room slowly quieted again. "I don't want the money," she said. A wave of confusion passed through the crowd. Victor frowned slightly. "You don't?" Sophia shook her head. I didn't come here for that. The room grew silent again, curiosity filling the air. Victor looked at her carefully. Then why did you accept the dance challenge? Sophia took a small breath before answering. Because years ago, she said softly, I was a professional dancer. I had dreams, competitions, a career, but life changed. My family needed me, and I had to walk away from everything. Some guests exchanged surprised looks. I came here tonight as a maid, she continued, but for a few minutes, I wanted to feel like myself again. The honesty in her voice touched the entire room. Victor stood quietly, then nodded slowly. Well, he said, smiling warmly now, whether you won the prize or not, you won fair and square. The crowd applauded again. But just as the moment seemed to settle, the event organizer who had been whispering earlier rushed forward and handed Victor a phone. Victor glanced at the screen. His eyebrows lifted in surprise. Then he looked back at Sophia. You really didn't tell anyone who you were, did you? He said. Sophia looked confused. What do you mean? Victor turned the phone so the nearby cameras could see the article open on the screen. A headline from years ago. A photo of Sophia on a stage. International dance champion disappears after winning global finals. The crowd gasped again. Victor looked back at her with a stunned smile. So the quiet maid who just beat a billionaire in a $100 million dance challenge, he said slowly, was already one of the best dancers in the world. The ballroom stayed silent for a few seconds after Victor revealed the headline on his phone. Guests leaned closer, trying to read the screen, while others searched the name online on their own phones. Within moments, whispers began spreading across the room again. Wait, it's really her. I remember that story. She disappeared after winning a huge competition. The same crowd that had laughed when a maid walked onto the dance floor was now staring at Sophia with completely different expressions. Some looked shocked, others looked embarrassed. The atmosphere had changed from amusement to respect. Sophia stood quietly under bright lights, her hands gently folded in front of her. She hadn't expected the article to appear. For years she had lived a simple life, far away from the stage, far away from the competitions, and far away from the spotlight that once followed her. Victor slowly lowered his phone and looked at her again, this time with genuine admiration. So that's why, he said softly, that's why you moved the way you did. Sophia gave a small smile. Dancing never really leaves you. The billionaire nodded thoughtfully. For the first time that night, the powerful businessman looked less like a showman and more like someone reflecting on what he had just witnessed. You could have taken the $100 million, he said. You earned it. Sophia glanced around the ballroom for a moment. The crowd, the cameras, the stage, everything reminded her of the life she once had, but her expression stayed calm. I didn't come for money, she repeated gently. Tonight was just a reminder. Victor studied her for a moment. Then he laughed softly, not the loud, confident laugh from earlier, but something quieter and more sincere. Well, he said into the microphone again, whether she wants a prize or not, I think we can all agree that Sophia just won the greatest dance challenge this mansion has ever seen. The audience erupted into applause again, louder than before. Even the staff members along the walls clapped proudly. Thomas, the security guard, shook his head with a smile. I knew something was different about her, he muttered. Victor waited until the applause settled before speaking again. You may not want the $100 million, he said, turning back to Sophia, but I'd still like to honor the spirit of the challenge. He paused for a moment, thinking. How about this, he continued. Instead of the prize money, I'd like to sponsor a global dance academy in your name, a place where talented kids who can't afford training can learn to dance. The crowd reacted instantly, cheering at the idea. Victor smiled. And you'll be the one who helps guide them. Sophia looked surprised, clearly not expecting that offer. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Then she nodded slowly. That would mean more than any prize. The audience clapped again, and several guests began talking excitedly about the idea of a new dance academy, inspired by the incredible moment they had just witnessed. As the music slowly returned to the background, the intense atmosphere of the dance challenge began to relax. Guests returned to conversations, though almost everyone was still talking about the same thing. The moment a quiet maid stepped onto the dance floor and stunned a billionaire. Victor leaned slightly toward Sophia and said with a smile, "You know, I started this whole thing thinking I was the best dancer in the room." Sophia laughed softly. "And now?" she asked. Victor looked around at the cheering crowd and shook his head. "Now I know something important," he said. "What's that?" "That talent can come from anywhere, even from someone people forget to notice." Across the ballroom, phones were still recording and uploading the moment. By morning, the story of the Billionaire Dance Challenge, the maid who shocked the crowd, and the unforgettable performance which spread across the internet. But for Sophia, the most important thing had already happened. For the first time in years, she had danced again. And this time, the whole world had finally seen it.